Alien Logic, a Skyrealms of Jorune Adventure is an adventure game with RPG elements developed by Ceridus Software for DOS. It was published in 1994 by SSI and is currently abandonware. The world of Jorune is largely the creation of a man named Andrew Lecker. It had begun when he was in the 7th grade as a spin-off of Metamorphosis Alpha, then would be turned in as an 8th grade English sci-fi assignment. Andrew was joined by his fellow classmate Miles Tevis, who would provide the illustrations. They would continue to refine and playtest the game until Andrew's sister helped get the game published in 1984, while he studied as an undergrad. Miles Tevis's scratchy black and white illustrations are moody and evocative, beckoning one to explore the mysteries of its world and discover the secrets of its enigmatic races. Also, look at that cover. Andrew would later move into a career in games development, allowing him to finally realize his setting on the computer screen. Rather than go with a traditional dungeon crawler, of which SSI published many, he instead chose an interesting spin on a point-and-click interface, which we'll now explore in further detail. Where the game differs from a traditional adventure game is in its ties to its unusual setting and very strange minigames, and it's impossible to discuss further without going into some detail in the world. You are a Muad'Dra, one of the world's demi-humans, with the capability to sense Isho used in the weaving of magical spells called Daishas. A large part of your adventure is a journey to collect magical knowledge and increase your powers for your confrontation with the big bad. There is no experience-based progression system. Instead, players must engage in various minigames in reward for items and abilities as they travel through the overworld or explore the game's alien ruins. Weave crystals allow the player to learn new spells by visiting what's called a Kerning Bay Master. By drawing a rapidly dissipating path using your supply of weave crystals, one can draw a new spell into oneself and thereby add it to your repertoire. Power crystals can turn on power bays in Shanthic ruins, later allowing the player to utilize temporary spells like Rejuvenate, Lava Walk, or turn into a floating eye to fly up through the ceilings to reach inaccessible areas, which can be learned through magical items called Sarks. Raid crystals give a permanent increase to the recovery of magical essences and are essential in any sort of magical duel or for the energies involved in powerful daishas. Finally, warp crystals are the exceedingly rare crystals powering what are called the Klieshta, the magical pedestals built long ago by the now declining Shanthic native race, which are used to access the warp world fast travel system in the game. Other helpful items include liminates, vaguely described in the material as underground roots or minerals, which sometimes fulfill the function of medicine and other times just exists as desirable trade items. The last category of items are recos. These are genetically engineered helpers commonly used to dig up crystals and liminates, or to heal one's wounds. They can be either bought or grown in incupods in another minigame. This is less convoluted than it looks. First, you take what's called a cork and transplant this into the top of the incupod. The different clots will allow you to shape the embryo close to what you want, but there's always half a chance of producing a grotesque miscarriage, doomed to take one glance at the world in wonder before rupturing into a pool of unstable cells. The life of even a developed Rico is short and can expire at any moment, unless your save's coming. The terrain map is used for overland travel. Icons appear representing structures, wandering creatures, villages, Shanthic ruins, crystal patches, liminates, incupods, and warps. Your proximity to these things is indicated in the top right. Turning off this display allows you to enter side view and save the game. Unfortunately, travel is obnoxiously quick in the overland map, requiring a deft touch. Because of this focus on exploration, the game features some essential keyboard commands only documented in the game's manual. While in exploration mode, shift and left click to jump. The platforming is bad. Shift and right click to use your magical Tra sense to reveal hidden objects. Spacebar switches between exploration mode and Daisha mode, the spell weaving combat mode, recognizable by your character's cowboy magician stance and disturbing grin. In this combat stance, right-click weaves your offensive daisha like a fireball or lightning, and shift right-click engages in your defensive daisha, like absorb or reflect. The function keys allow you to set strategies, which is to say, a preset sequence of offensive spells plus one protective spell. You're also given very little direction except to go out there and grow more powerful to beat the game's final villain. And this is a problem further compounded by getting given the coordinates and sometimes the name of a country, when there's often very little to indicate to a player unfamiliar with the names or the coordinates where this place might be. Can you tell me where in Warp World is 9990? Or Ardoth? Pathetic. You would easily be beaten in a game of wits by a kid in the 90s. Problems also arise later in the game in not knowing which ruins have already been visited from the map. Despite the interesting adventure mechanics here, it does essentially boil down to a tedious cycle of having to visit a lot of limited and repeated assets across various locations until you realize you have unlocked the game's final location in the warp. I did encounter some bugs, either crashes to desktop or scripting issues relating to subplots. The worst is that new warp locations unlocked by Cleishta sometimes don't always mark themselves as new. Despite all its issues and the grindy nature of its gameplay loop, I do nevertheless find the game a fascinating sort of artifact. Which brings us to the setting. In 2155, humans colonized Jorune, a uniquely lush, diverse planet inhabited by multiple sentient species, some seemingly introduced long ago. The planet also possessed unique near-magical geological features, such as floating landmasses. The energy which allows this, called Isho, was also the basis for the technology practiced by the native sentient population, and could be manipulated in a technique not dissimilar to magic by the peaceful poetic race known as the Shantha. At first, the humans cohabited with the Shantha natives in an uneasy peace. Then news of conflict on Earth reached the colonists, followed by an ominous silence. The colonies of Jorune were alone. Without access to supplies and support from Earth, humans resorted to conquest as a means to secure resources and a future. As the humans aggressed on the lands of the native Shantha, they responded in kind by unveiling ancient weaponry that channeled Isho into the colonial strongholds, killing thousands. Humans struck back with a genetically engineered virus, while the waves of alien Isho energies interacted catastrophically with the energy sources used by humanity, causing geological upheavals that tore apart the land. In the aftermath of this apocalypse, Theodore Iskin, a scientist alone and isolated in a remote laboratory and thinking himself the last living human, designs a series of human-animal hybrids, better able to survive this harsh new world. These are the Iskin races, of which the game features the Woofen, the Bronth, and lastly the Kruger, reviled by the other Iskin races on the basis of a legend that a Kruger was responsible for Iskin's death. Other human species would also spring into being during a magical conjunction hundreds of years later. These would be the blue-skinned atavistic Trach, and most importantly, a human of slight stature called a Muadra, capable of wielding the magical Isho energies of the planet and weaving spells called Daishas. Thousands of years later, the Shantha have long since settled into a truce with humanity, withdrawing from the world to serve as custodians of their last remaining fragments of knowledge, either protecting their sacred sites and technologies, or sleeping timelessly in their keeper rods. Advanced human technology has been lost or destroyed, with what remaining being carefully secured and in the control of the elite of the nations to which these old wars seem just vague legends. Outside of the cities, the danger of a savage and untamed wilderness is all too real.
Spoiler warning. Spoilers in 3, 2, 1.
The scene set, you open your eyes and are greeted by Thriddle, one of Jorune's peaceful, scholarly race, and not just any Thriddle, but the Thriddle Seer himself, Sauro Gomo, the ambassador to the most populous human nation, Birdoth, and famous for his victory over a powerful band of renegade Muad'Dib sorcerers, whose escape forms the basis of its own separate Jorune Adventure module. You yourself are a Muad'Dib, waking from the stasis of one of the Shantha's keeper rods. You listen as Sauro relates how you came to find yourself before him. 4 years earlier, your village was attacked by a Shantha faction led by Ditra Aldesti, otherwise known as the Red Shantha, an unusually bellicose Shantha who has held on bitterly to the 1,000-year grudge with mankind, and for hundreds of years has been waging attacks against human villages. Shah Imza, a Shantha opposed to these plans, placed you in the stasis of a keeper rod and promised to get you to the Thriddle stronghold Tan Ikrid, the Mountain Crown, but the keeper rod went astray. First, your keeper rod was used as a scratching post by Kruger, one of Isken's races. Then it was used as a backscratcher by Karastan. Then it was discarded in a bigger spawning pit and was found by a Thriddle survey team amongst the filth. Oh, the indignity, etc. To find your fellow captured villagers, Sauro suggests that you will need to master Warp World, the means of using magic to travel across Jorune. But to confront the Red Shantha, you will need to master the Weave World, the place in your mind in which you gather knowledge of new spells called Daishas. Sauro points you to the location of a warp leading to the human city of Ardoth, where you will be able to find merchants, a Koenig Bay master to aid in mastering the Weave World, and Shah Imza, the Shantha who saved you. The warp takes you into the middle of a bronze field, who is resigned to the fate of having his field trampled. Some polite reassurances some directions later, and you arrive at Ardoth. Friendly gatekeeper Sergeant Burton greets you with a smile, and is only too happy to discuss current events or the history of the city before you go on your way to talk to Shah Imza. Shah Imza is not impressed when you darken his doorstep. He had been discovered shortly after betraying the Red Shantha. Several keeper rods housing your friends were destroyed in the crossfire as he walked away to safety. The only refuge he could find was in a human city, in constant torment amongst the creatures responsible for his civilization's destruction. After some cajoling, Shah Imza agrees to help, and you set out into the great overworld to hunt out Shanthic sites and weave crystals to expand your magical abilities for your final confrontation. As you expand your knowledge of Shanthic ruins and Klieshta sites, it pays to return to Sauro for directions to further Shanthic ruins, or check in with Sergeant Burton for an update on current events. In one of the city's more opulent areas, you meet someone who had left your village long before the attack. Asalia, once teased around the neighborhood as an awkward girl, has matured into a woman of considerable talents, and has made something of a name for herself in the city. She helps organize a biotech cork cutting kit from a surly Muad'Dib associate, while frequently complaining not to ruin things for her. For a time I fell into a few patterns, hunting the Bega, the Scragga, and the Pibba. Well, more foraging for Pibba. Look at these cute little guys. I would sell these in town and then buy corks for implanting in incupods that grow wild in certain areas, developing them into Rico-surgeons to fix my wounds along the way, and miners to uncover more weave and ray crystals to become a more capable Isho user. Sauro charges you to uncover as many warp stones as possible to help find your missing villager friends, and the archives state that once someone has achieved sufficient mastery of the warp, new locations occasionally arise unbidden while in sleep, which could provide a lead in uncovering the Red Shantha's hidden fortress. The journey takes you across all the lands of Jorune. On the landmass of Drael, we meet the king of the Blueskin Charge subspecies, and smooth talk him into gaining access to their Shanthic temple. In Timorntro, the dangerous Kruger dwell in huts above a Shanthic site, and the only thing that will convince them to give you access are the legendary scrolls of Isken, which they hope will clear their name of the accusation of having killed their beloved creator. In the swamplands, a Ramian scholar will detail the history of their race, providing some insight into their attacks in human territory, caused by the need for a medicine, Sherm-E, that does not grow in the lands in which they dwell. He speaks of another creation of the legendary scientist Iskin, a Rico, itself capable of producing this medicine. As you explore more, tensions with a bug-like Cleash begin to increase. An invasion of Skarmus, a slave species controlled by the Cleash, invades the lands of the Woofin, and with your intervention you cripple the army at its head by striking at its Cleash commanders. On arriving at a Shanthic site that was once a crossroads for the warp world, you find all of its Cleashtas inoperable, their warp stones removed. An unfamiliar blonde woman is seen lurking about. With this troubling news in mind, when you return to Sauro, he informs you of an imminent Cleash invasion on the Thriddle stronghold and asks you to bring back information on their numbers. The easiest way being just to ask them directly, to which their alien bluntness and assured confidence dictates they reveal the answer to you. However, standing next to the Cleash general is the blonde from the crossroads, who admits to being responsible for the missing warp crystals from the Shanthic ruins. On returning to Sauro, he performs some calculations. 8 warp crystals were required to transport armies of the size given. From soil, organic matter, and their own adhesive saliva, the Cleash would use the crystal in the construction of their own form of teleporter, a warp pod. Sauro is unsettled, of course, but what he doesn't know is that he's threatening you with a good time. So off you go. As you fish the last warp crystals from the Cleash warp pods against Classy's begging and threats, the invasion evaporates, but in your hand are 8 Cleashtas to restore to life. Once enough knowledge has been obtained, a new location appears in the warp, leading to a valley with a Shanthic ruin and a locked door. Upon exiting, you are greeted by Classy, who reveals her motivations throughout the story. The Cleash had long desired the home of the Thriddle, Tan Ikrid, because it was once the starport of their interstellar masters, the Lemurians, who had fled after a war with the Shanthas thousands of years before the arrival of man. By helping the Cleash, she was allowed time with an ancient transponder she was using to control the flight path of an ancient lost Skyrealm that she hoped could be hers. In exchange for the transponder, she provides you with the key, giving access to the Red Shantha's floating fortress. You journey through a heavily defended Shanthic temple. Isho constructs, Evids, patrol the halls, and while you scout about in your own Evid form, you can strike up a conversation with their rudimentary intellects. Shanthas block your approach. It's something of a tragedy every time a Shantha enters Shaid, the Isholess state of death, but you press on. That you are capable of managing a 2-on-1 fight with talented Daisha weavers is a testament to your growth. At the start of the game, Shantha are terrifying combatants. Chasm yawns beneath you, a hole at the bottom of the Skyrealm to which one slip will result in being dashed below after a long and considerable time to ponder your mistakes. Across this, the Red Shantha speaks of his rage, and how the lives of your villagers will be consumed in summoning the Elshon Shi Ivid, the Warp Walker, the powerful Isho construct that once annihilated the Lemurian invaders before the coming of man. You assume the cowboy magician stance to test your abilities against one of the most powerful Isho weavers on Jorune. With careful timing, the energies cast against you are absorbed and redirected at your foe, and eventually he folds, and you taste a bittersweet victory as one more Shantha departs the world. Sauro Gomo provides you with a debrief of your actions. In my case, some subplots never progressed, but from what I understand, much like Fallout, Sauro would describe outcomes based on your actions, and reveal the fate of Classy and her Skyrealm. And so concludes Alien Logic Skyrealms of Jorune, a straightforward story largely obscured by a lot of unmemorable words for things. Criticism could be leveled at the plot and the one-dimensional characters, but I believe the writing is fitting a genre that never actually overly concerned itself with these sorts of things. Something along the lines of a pulp adventure for teens, where the appeal lies in a celebration of escapism itself. The non-linear exploration also diminishes any sense of urgency, though this is endemic to any free-roaming game, so it's hard to hold against it. To provide you with a more complete picture, I delved into the source books for Jorune, and can tell you that the game is not even a complete picture of that setting. There are various creatures, settlements, and even mechanics that never made the cut, some quite interesting. One such example is the citizenship ceremony, where one gets a metal disc made from the hulls of the original colony starships, stamped with deeds as a prerequisite for citizenship and permission to own powerful Earth tech armaments. But everything is obfuscated in a collection of alien gibberish. They aren't a criminal, they're a diorder. One doesn't seek citizenship, one seeks Dren. And so on. I'm not opposed at all to made-up words, but a lot of this feels largely unnecessary. Let's talk briefly about another setting that tackles this a little better. As old as the original setting is, there appears to be some inspiration from what's often claimed to be the second RPG ever published, 1974's Empire of the Petal Throne, otherwise known as the world of Tekkamel. Andrew Lecker stated in Jorune's first Shillari fanzine that Tekkamel is the first role-playing game he ever encountered, which he never played but nevertheless found a way into his heart. He comments, and quotes from a passage detailing the darkness of that world. And we can see how Jorune, though replete with small poignant tragedies in its timeline, avoids the horror or grim darkness that frequently becomes associated with heroic pulp, like Robert E. Howard's works. Some of Jorune's strongest ideas, however, are those that are inspired by Tekkamel, Empire of the Petal Throne. One of the reasons I always love far distant future settings are the inherent narrative reasons for adventuring mechanics, a proliferation of ruins and treasure troves of powerful technology. Alien creatures, some of which are struggling to adapt to an environment in which they are not native. Where Tekkamel gets it right that Jorune gets wrong is Tekkamel, like Middle-earth, was devised by a linguist. Its nouns are fragrant with cultural associations and suggestions that paint a subtle picture of what they are used to label. That sort of linguistic expertise provides its colour through Tekkamel or Middle-earth. One of my favourite science fiction writers, Gene Wolfe, also employs a similar technique by using Latin, Greek, and Hebrew to convey a sense of the archaic or the spiritual where required. For a name is more than just an agglomeration of sounds. A name is an indication of a history, and it's a hard ask for someone not already invested to remember the difference between a thriddle and a thivin. I don't wish to harp on Jorune's faults in this section further, so in its defense, as much as I like the world of Tekkamel, this too isn't without its faults. Tekkamel's terminology is just as overwhelming. It just happens to be more consistent and, in my opinion, more evocative. Barker's novels in the Tekkamel setting do feel contrived in a similar pure art way, especially the dialogue, and we won't even go into the Nazi one. As far as similar heroic fantasy is concerned, this is not a genre that has ever truly drawn me in. But in a different video, I have mentioned Jack Vance's Planet of Adventure series as one of my favourite examples, and would still highly recommend it. The game looks surprisingly good for the era. Starting with the UI, which, although initially confusing, is actually fairly user-friendly once you know the purpose of the many unusual, or sometimes similarly named items. Notably though, it's gorgeous in its aeony, marbly finish. Travelling overland reveals some beautifully crunchy land textures, and several biomes that one contemporary magazine, Computer Gaming World, described as photorealistic. Some of the small, wandering character sprites in the overworld are often difficult to make out, but then the large bitmaps of the character screen do an incredible job realising the details of this world. Though I think a lot of that is owing to the original drawings by Miles Tevis, who has since become a successful Hollywood conceptual artist, and it's hard to imagine Jorune without his iconic designs. I wonder if there's anyone out there who are fans of the original pen and paper RPG who were just the right age to freak out when they finally saw the Jorune world realized in incredible color bitmaps by the original creator. If there is anyone out there like that, let me know in the comments. Let me drink deep of your nostalgia. Let me vicariously partake of your memories. Let me snack on your brains. Short looping tracks provide most of the music you'll hear throughout your adventure, which will sometimes cut out when clicking the mouse. Although there are really only 3 tracks, which do get repetitive, they do set a mood, and are at least somewhat catchy. On the abandonware copy I got, this was actually CD audio, not MIDI. During combat or while exploring Shantic ruins, the music is mute, and the only things heard are the minimal sound effects that I would describe as merely serviceable in the context of 1994. I wish I had more to say about the sound. Alien Logic is such a curious game and gives me an excuse to do one of my favorite things: pour through black and white sourcebooks I'll never play and tease my sense of adventure with interesting trivia about unknown lands and gorgeously illustrated scenes that set my imagination a-wandering, and it's my pleasure to present this to you. Not to say that there isn't fascinating gameplay. Though repetitive, the game does provide a genuinely unique take on the adventure genre, a wandering, wizarding adventure light in an alien world complete with magical jewels. And these things. There are some genuinely good ideas unique to the setting. The Klee-Eshta system provides an in-universe reason for fast travel and ruin exploration, and in turn the warp stones make a decent MacGuffin for a plot point. The Skyrealms too are an interesting part of the pen and paper setting, providing a territory to explore or, if you're classy, some free real estate. In the sourcebooks there are details of how these Skyrealms might drift about, their wanderings having political ramifications, becoming bases of operations for pirates or crashing into mountains, causing avalanches, and becoming lodged for several days before moving on to new areas. Unfortunately, it has its share of faults, and I hesitate to call it a good game. The gameplay loops are repetitive, and apart from the difficult to remember and often unnecessary alien terminology endemic to the setting, the tone can also be grating in a fashion similar to adventure stories for young adults, where every character is an archetype of brat, nerd, jock, or hippie. Nevertheless, if you have watched some of my previous content, you may know of my affection for authentic creative labors of love, and for atypical worlds of strange and interesting images that, when stumbled onto at the right age, creates epiphanies in developing minds. To let a beautiful artifact disappear into the mists of history is always a tragedy, just like the death of a Shantha. So I hope you enjoyed this presentation I've made for you on a game struggling to not drown beneath the oppressive waves of time, which washes away all things.